CNN's John Zarella, who is at the Kennedy Space Center on the live line now. John, you could, I'm sure, see it from your vantage point, even 9 miles down. Describe the scene there.
Tom, it was just a situation where everything looked fine, and then all of a sudden it looked like a giant fireworks display overhead. The weather and the sky being so clear, you could, of course, see it for miles and miles. And at first, no one was quite sure what we had seen. Everyone was just sort of standing around as if things were going normally. But of course, when I saw that fireworks, sort of a fireworks display, I said, "This is not right. It's not something that I had ever seen before." And at that point, I began questioning what had happened, as we all did. But here now at the Kennedy Space Center, everybody's just stunned. They're in shock. It's a situation where people are just sort of standing around in just bewilderment at this point. And of course, we're not getting any information from here any more than what you are. Only just what we have just witnessed and what we've seen, this tragic incident. It just seemed like everything was going fine, as you said, up until about 9 miles downrange, and then that giant explosion of colors that it just looked like a 4th of July fireworks explosion, and certainly the most tragic incident to ever befall the space program. At least at this point, it seems that way. That's about all I really know.
John, we understand that a C-130 aircraft and several ships are now headed to that point about 9 miles downrange. Can you see any of the recovery efforts going on?
Negative. Not from our vantage point here up on the mound where the press area is. It's all we can see is, of course, the gantry and the empty launch pad, and in front of us the clock, which is still ticking at 12 minutes and now 50 seconds into what would have been the flight. And that is all we can see from this point. Of course, journalists scurrying around and everyone trying to just find out what indeed has happened here today. But no, we can see no activity at all. I did hear a helicopter flying overhead a while ago in the distance, and that was about the only sign at this point from where we are.
We saw a parachute that was floating down probably about 12 or 13 minutes after the explosion. Any word from NASA officials there about that parachute?
No, nothing. As a matter of fact, with just the naked eye, we couldn't tell what it was that was floating down. I certainly couldn't. And NASA is, of course, not saying much of anything at this point until, as I say, they get the recovery ships out there and get the vehicles out there to see what they can find out in the Atlantic Ocean. At this point, though, no word from NASA. They are, of course, as concerned, more so than anybody else in this entire country right now, and want to get everything straight before they start giving out any kind of information. I'm sure we're going to have to wait until those recovery vehicles get out there to the site.
We understand now that the parachute that we saw possibly may be from that C-130 medical personnel and frogmen going into the area. John, you and I have both been at the Kennedy Space Center several times. Every mission, before every mission, they go through the rehearsals of what to do if an emergency develops.
That's correct. And of course, at this point, this early on, it's so difficult to speculate, but it just seemed that it happened so suddenly that all of a sudden this giant burst of fire, these giant colors, the reds and the blues, that it's just who knows whether or not they had time to rehearse any kind of an emergency procedure at this point. If it was just an instantaneous explosion that no one was expecting, which it seems to be the case right now, God knows whether they had any kind of time to react to that, to prepare for an emergency like this.
Well, the explosion that we saw just a few minutes ago, we're back now to a live picture from a helicopter above the launch area. This is Mission Control in Houston. For the last 4 or 5 minutes, the audio channel from Mission Control has been silent. Not a single word has been spoken while the rescue efforts, if there are any to be made, are underway.
That's the same here, Tom. We're getting nothing here from NASA at the Kennedy Space Center. It has been just dead silence. And over in the press dome where the press gathers, it is much the same, a very, very gloomy atmosphere, and no one saying anything, just standing around and staring in bewilderment and really not knowing what to say or how to say it at this point, I think is the best way to put it.
John. Of paramount concern, of course, is the fate of the 7 people aboard the spacecraft. Bearing in mind that we have very little information, let's go for a second with what we have. Do we know at what height the craft exploded?
I have no information at all on that. All I can say is that because it was such a clear day and you could just see for miles, it was certainly in full view when it happened, and I have no idea what kind of height that would have been. It did not seem to be that far out over the water when it happened because of the trajectory of the liftoff. It seemed that it was carrying it almost well straight up from our vantage point. A little, obviously not, but a little over the ocean. And at that point, you could still see it in full view. And then all of a sudden, what at first you might have thought were separation of boosters, but of course we know that doesn't take place that early on in the mission. The shuttle had just made its roll and was on its way upward, and then suddenly that explosion. But again, it was in full view, so it certainly could not have been at a very, very high altitude when it happened, and certainly could not have been very, very far downrange.
John, we have some information from NASA right now as to exactly where parts of the spacecraft fell. They were reporting it fell at 28.64 north latitude and 80.28 degrees west longitude, just a few miles off Cape Canaveral.
That would make very, very good sense, Marianne. That's exactly what it seemed like here. Pieces of debris, of course, falling back into the ocean, and you could see them falling, and again, not knowing what it was that was falling off, but knowing entirely throughout the entire few moments after it happened that this was not right. You knew that it wasn't that far downrange or that high in altitude when it happened. I don't know, obviously, how far out, but certainly, again, reiterate, it does not seem like it was at a very, very high altitude or very out in the far out, and it would seem to indicate that they can get to the debris fairly quickly. Of course, recovery ships are always standing by. And again, going back to a point we made earlier, if this had been something they had practiced for, something that they could have aborted and come back to Kennedy Space Center, I'm sure they would have done that. It just seems at this point that it was an unforeseen cataclysmic tragedy that may have befallen us here today, and that there was no way to make any kind of emergency preparations to come back to KSC with the shuttle itself at this point.
John, we will stand by at the Kennedy Space Center. Let's go back now about 5 hours ago when the 7 members of the shuttle crew were entering in to the spacecraft. Here you see 37-year-old New Hampshire teacher Christa McAuliffe preparing to...
Good morning, Aurora. Good morning, Judith.
There's Judy Resnik on the intercom. She's already inside the shuttle. On the left, you see 39-year-old Ellison Onizuka. For those of you who may just be joining us, the 25th Space Shuttle mission has apparently ended in tragedy in a huge fireball in the sky. Apparently, the solid rocket booster exploded about 9 miles downrange. The $1.2 billion spacecraft, only one of 4 in the fleet. This was only the second of a record 15 shuttle flights NASA had planned for this year. NASA says the explosion occurred about 60 seconds into the flight, where they were preparing to throttle their engines up to maximum thrust. They had throttled them down to the 60% level at about 35 seconds in order to reduce the forces of gravity during the liftoff.
Throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
The explosion occurred at a time when Challenger was to enter a period of the maximum stress, when wind and other atmospheric conditions could place the maximum force on the outside of the vehicle. There you see the huge fireball and 2 solid rockets trailing white smoke. That is one of the solid rockets there. After the explosion, we could not see the orbiter itself. Apparently exploded in little pieces, and only the 2 solid rockets floated down. This is a live picture off the Florida coast at the Kennedy Space Center from one of NASA's helicopters. We cannot see any of the rescue efforts underway. They apparently are heading down downrange. Let's go to the White House now and Larry speaks.
And shocked at what he has just seen replayed on television concerning the shuttle launch. We do not have any more information than is being provided to the public at this time. The way the Federal President found out about it is he was in the Oval Office with a group of senior staff preparing for some questions with a group of network correspondents and anchors that were having lunch in the White House today regarding the budget and the State of the Union. The Vice President and the Foreign Policy Advisor, John Poindexter, came in with others and informed the President that the news had just broken. We immediately adjourned our Oval Office meeting and went into an adjoining room, the President's study, where there's a television, and the President then began to review television reports of the explosion there shortly after the launch. So once again, the President is concerned. He is saddened. He is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
What is the best information as to the condition of the crew, Larry, at this point?
We don't have any more information than what is being provided to the public on television. Hopefully later we will be able to get some, and that's the President's first priority is to find out what information that is available. We just don't have any more. No, we have not from the Oval Office.
Will this affect in any way the plans for the State of the Union tonight?
I don't believe so. I'm certain that the President will feel compelled to mention this, depending on the outcome of what we learn here in a few minutes.
Will it affect the shuttle program, Larry?
Well, that's hard to say, you know, here in 15 or 20 minutes after an incident of this type is concerned. I'm sure it will not affect the United States' determination to consider to continue the exploration of space and all the benefits we've received from it. While this is indeed tragic, it certainly will not deter the United States in its interest in space exploration.
All the problems that the shuttle has had, will any substantial reevaluation be done of the program itself?
Well, once again, you're very premature in asking a question concerning the future of the space program. The United States has met adversity many times before in the space program. It is one of the most effective and successful programs of that type that any country has ever undertaken.
Larry, can you tell us anything specifically that the President said, any quotations, and did he make any mention of the fact that the teacher that he suggested, that the program of a teacher in space, that teacher was on board this flight?
Well, I know that was on his mind. Quite frankly, the President stood there in almost stunned silence as he watched the television. You could certainly read the concern, the sorrow, the anxiety on his face as he watched, and the group watched around him. As I say, he was virtually watched in silence.
Might anyone from the White House be leading some sort of investigating team, or will it just be up to NASA to investigate this?
All this is very, very early, and there's just nothing we can say. Our immediate concern is the crew, and all of these other questions will just have to be deferred until much later.
Was anything said about the fact that the teacher was on board this plane?
Well, it was something that was on all of our minds, that we did have the first teacher in space, really the first civilian, so to speak, other than our members of Congress who have flown in space, and certainly that's on our mind.
Are there any scientific aides who have been able to say that they could survive such an explosion?
Just don't have that kind of information yet.
You said that the Vice President, Admiral Poindexter, informed the President. How did the White House learn about it?
I'm certain that we probably learned it from the news media, as we do many times when incidents like this occur unexpectedly.
Might this influence the decision about whether other civilians will be allowed on the shuttle from now on, Larry?
Once again, all of these questions, our immediate concern is for the fate of the crew, to find out exactly what has happened to those 7 people aboard. All of these other questions we'll just have to wait till later. Dave?
Tell us anything about what the President's schedule, how the President's schedule is changing now?
The President's schedule has not changed. He will keep on with what he had planned today and the State of the Union tonight. And once again, I think the only change in his schedule would be to simply be updated and try to seek the facts in this.
Will the president be making any phone calls to the family, Larry?
I just don't know. Customarily he does, but we're going to wait till we find out what the facts are.
Larry, he watched in silence, but were there no quotes that you could give us?
Nothing. It was virtually in silence.